The salon's atmosphere was alive with laughter and Christmas music, an aromatic mix of pine and cinnamon floating through the air, as I held a wineglass in my hands. Guests moved in the shadows, with the festive lights blinking in a dazzling ballet. I looked at Richard from across the room, surrounded by friends, his charisma always radiating like an incandescent sun. It was a spectacle he commanded, his words like soft music, but I knew there was a dissonant note in the perfect melodies of that marriage. Then, he stood up. Children and adults fell silent instantly, the laughter transformed into a tremendous expectation, as if the air had become thick. My heart raced when I saw the glint in his eyes, the mannerisms of a man who knew he had a captive audience. And so, with the skill of a conductor, he wielded the knife of his words before me. "Clara, I want a divorce." In that moment, time seemed to stretch. The discomfort echoed in my mind, and the stares around me became a judgment. I felt as if a storm was brewing in my chest. Pain and anger collided in an internal war. The atmosphere of fellowship and friendship evaporated, and I stood there exposed. The world was spinning, but I was paralyzed, facing the cruel reality. For a brief instant, I wanted to scream, cry, punch the table, anything to show the avalanche of emotions exploding inside me. But no. I couldn't allow myself that. I took a deep breath, each inhalation an anchor holding me to rationality. What now? The thought formed quickly: action. In the blink of an eye, my mind, always methodical and observant, began to operate in a completely different way. The audience around was eager, probably expecting a dramatic scene, but it would not materialize. I was not a woman on the verge of a breakdown, I was a lawyer. My brain was in survival mode, turning that humiliating moment into an opportunity. The silence dragged on between my feelings. What more could I discover, plan, and ultimately, turn everything around? Richard had lit the fire of betrayal in front of an entire audience, and while the pain cut through my being, an insatiable determination began to emerge. The game wasn't over, this was just the beginning. I was never a woman who let challenges defeat her. I would rise, revisit every memory, every clue that had been left behind. He didn't know he was about to face the real Clara, the lawyer who would not just fight, but who planned to win, lethally. The echoes of that announcement still reverberated in my mind as memories of my relationship with Richard began to surface, a spiral of reminiscences I tried to control. The first date, that day when the universe seemed to conspire in our favor. A coffee shop, an intense gaze, his velvety voice that danced with my insecurities. He was everything I had dreamed of, a man who personified success and ambition. It was captivating at the time, and even now, I can feel the butterflies I used to get in his presence. As the months passed, love transformed into something deeper. He was always there for me, supporting and encouraging me in my legal career, praising my determination and strength. I remember how he used to compare me to a gladiator, capable of fighting any opponent in court with poise and skill. But deep down, something wasn't right. There was an unknown factor that was beginning to create fissures in our story. Over time, the lies began to emerge. Messages he left open that I discovered by accident. Business trips where a meeting was scheduled, but which was actually a rendezvous with Martha. Looking at their conversations was like watching a horror movie. The scenes, the laughter, the affectionate words exchanged in a cold, calculated context. What was once shared between us was now the subject of heated whispers. And I, in my innocence, simply believed the promises made with such fervor. And there she was, Martha. My confidant, the advisor in times of difficulty, always ready to offer a friendly shoulder. Sweet Martha, who always had the right words to calm my fears. She, who consumed so much of my mental space, had become a shadow of betrayal. Looking back, my stomach turns remembering her constant interactions with Richard, that friendly hug that seemed more like an embrace, a warmth that was not mine. The facade we had built was crumbling. In the decor of our living room, the white walls seemed to fill with memories of a happiness that had now been transformed into a frightening prison of lies. Ignoring the signs that were blatantly exposed was a mistake that cost me dearly. The silence I kept between us was not proof of strength, it was the folly of someone who didn't want to face the truth that had always been right in front of me. A rustle in an office room or the arrival of a message before dinner time became questions that wrestled in my brain like riddles. Why is he acting so strange? Why has Martha become so close? A whole tangle of feelings and insecurities began to consume me, but deep down, hope still burned. Hope that it was all just a phase, that we wouldn't just become another statistic of broken marriages.
What else could be happening beneath the surface?
Now, as I look at all this with the clarity that pain has given me, I realize that my reluctance to accept reality was a choice.
A veritable shield against vulnerability.
And yet, the darkness crept in, not like a storm, but like a light fog that consumed everything. Now, it was time to revisit these memories, to no longer ignore the signs, but to turn them into pieces of a puzzle. Something was finally clear. I had been made of lies and illusions, but I would not let those shadows define my future. The plan would begin. Every detail, every friendship, every ambiguous memory, all would be tools in my quest for the truth. I had to know. To distill the essence of this poison and turn it into strength. Every lie that emerged would be a piece of information, every betrayal an advantage. The game was just beginning, and I already had my first strategy in mind. This epic turnaround would lead me down a path of redemption and power. With determination pulsing through my veins, the first light of morning brought a clarity I couldn't access before. The intensity of my purpose solidified. I had to act. It was time to gather information, to build a solid foundation on which I could construct my next move. I sat at my desk, opening the folders of documents Richard brought home, analyzing every detail as if it were a piece of a huge puzzle. The first step was to get proof. I needed evidence that left no room for doubt. That morning, I visited a friend who worked at Richard's office. He was a long-time acquaintance, someone I trusted. Always kind and helpful, his loyalty was not something I questioned. I invited him for coffee, looking for an excuse not to raise suspicion. When we finally found a quiet place, surrounded by the aromas of fresh coffee and newly baked pastries, I began to steer the conversation. "Richard has been very busy, hasn't he?" I asked, trying to maintain a casual tone while watching every expression on his face. "Oh, you know. Always in meetings or on business trips," he replied, avoiding my gaze. I could sense there was something more behind that curtain of formality. Time stretched on as I twisted his words in search of a clue, and then, as if a switch had flipped in his mind, he finally opened up.
"Look, Clara. Just between us.
Richard has been at certain events that you don't know about. I can't give you many details, but there are strange things happening behind the scenes." Those words lit a flame within me, a premonition that this could be the key to understanding the betrayal. Adrenaline surged as he continued. I was careful in extracting more information, a conscious strategy, but without letting him feel the true intensity of my investigation. I found a surveillance system I could use to access Richard's messages. I remember the afternoon I sat in front of the computer, the cursor blinking on the screen as if it were challenging me. My heart pounded with a mix of anxiety and excitement. I knew I needed the password. There was a risk, but the cards of life had been dealt to me, and I had to play them. After a few days of trying and immersing myself in his habits, I finally managed to get the password he used to access his corporate email. A mix of euphoria and self-control enveloped me. I was about to open the door to a world he had hidden under layers of distrust and contempt. With a click, Richard's inbox opened before me. Messages and more messages floated on the screen, some marked as unread. A feeling of excitement took over as I scrolled through the screen, until a name jumped out at me, Martha. My heart sank as the words formed into a turbulent tide. The content of the conversation reflected not just an affair, but a complicity that suffocated the boundaries of our friendship. Each exchange of messages became a punch to the gut, revealing the betrayal in explicit detail. There they were, stamped on the screen, promises made in whispers that had become undeniable evidence. Anger began to simmer inside me, but I maintained control, channeling that emotion into what would come next. Once again, the cold, calculating mind of a lawyer took over, and a disturbing calm settled in. I was no longer the victim. I made the decision to turn the pain into a plan of action. The fight I had prepared for was beginning to unfold, and I finally saw the center of the entire labyrinth, ready to use the weapons I had obtained, truth and logic. My mind laughed at the irony.
Richard never truly knew me.
He never knew how far betrayal could lead, and especially, that I would always play to win. The lights of revelation guided me, and from this point on, there would be no turning back. I was on a path that would pave not only my victory, but also my liberation. With the messages open on the screen, I finally had the proof I had been searching for. Time seemed to drain away, each sentence I read etching itself into my mind like a banner of betrayal. Martha and Richard were planning a trip, a business retreat they seemed to have arranged over weeks. They talked about how hidden the meeting should be, as if the world was part of their performance. The poison overflowing from the screen was palpable, and at that moment, I not only had a motive to confront them, but a reason strong enough to escape this unhappy narrative that enveloped my life. Intervals of anger and determination mixed in an emotional whirlwind. I stood up from the chair, taking a gulp of fresh air. It was time to gain control of the situation. Every detail I acquired would become a thorn in their consciences. I was no longer just a spectator. The gears began to turn in my mind. I decided that exposing them would be my next step, and I planned how I would do it. I wouldn't just seek confrontation, I wanted the truth to be utterly implacable, a gale that would tear down the entire house of cards built by Richard and Martha. I thought of a strategic way to get their attention while planting the seeds of doubt and terror. With a calmness I didn't feel, I wrote a note to Richard. The message was direct, almost cold: "We need to talk. You have no idea what I already know." I sent it through the phone's messaging platform, a move that made my heart race. It was a distant rhyme to the intensity of their love messages, but with an infinitely greater weight. A day passed, and tension hung in the air as I waited for his response. Deep down, there was a hope that he would begin to feel dread creeping into his soul, a kind of urgency and fear regarding what I knew. When my message was finally read, his reply was not long in coming: "Where now?" I arranged a meeting at the coffee shop where we used to go together. The place was becoming a familiar trap, and the irony pleased me. In the meantime, I prepared a disguise, a sober and formal outfit that would prevent him from noticing the intensity of the inner turmoil consuming me. Upon entering the cafe, I saw Richard at the table, already deciding what to order, and I realized from his expression that he had no idea of the labyrinth he was entering. When I approached, he greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes.
Sweet illusion.
Decades could pass, and he would never know how to decipher the fury that was about to emerge. I spoke in a controlled, slightly provocative tone, as if we were just two old friends reminiscing about good times. Questions centered on a precarious stability, each one would bring me a step closer to the climax.
"You seem distant. What is going on?"
I inquired, trying to maintain an air of indifference. He hesitated, perhaps needing to polish his own lies. The tension was electric as I watched his every move. With each breath, the idea that I was in control warmed me from within. Finally, when his smile wavered, I decided to reveal a little of what I had discovered.
"You know,
I've been remembering a few things, Richard. Sometimes, the past has a funny way of coming back to the surface, don't you think?" His expression froze. The eyes that once danced had now become abysses. I delivered the blow, each word like an arrow. "I know about you and Martha. The trip, the messages. I don't know how much more, but you should know it ends here." He stopped, the air seeming to vanish between our nervous smiles. "Clara, you don't know what you're talking about." The response was weak, but not hesitant. "And what do you say about this?" I shot back, sliding my phone across the table, the screen filled with the messages I had read earlier. We both knew that the words written there were enough to dismantle the essence of our marriage. The coffee shop around us was a separate universe, a stage just for the two of us on a path of destruction.
The silence stretched.
He looked back at me with a mixture of denial and recognition. My growing expectation fed on the vulnerability that had once defined me. The bond between us was broken. Richard was suffocating, and in the face of all his pride, he found himself a hostage to the consequences of his own actions. "I'm sorry," he murmured, "but it was not enough." "Sorry won't fix anything," I continued, my voice still cold. "If you think you're going to get out of this unscathed, you're mistaken. The battle has just begun, and I am no longer the woman you mistreated." And in that coffee shop, on an ordinary day, the roles reversed. I, Clara, was no longer the object of betrayal. I stood tall, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, ready to orchestrate my own form of justice. Richard's gaze was a mixture of anger and despair. He was clearly suffocating, removed from the pedestal where I used to see him. A dark satisfaction rose in me, knowing I was finally in control. You can't just apologize and think everything will go back to normal, Richard. Your choices have consequences, I said, my voice firm and resolute. Every word that left me sounded like a decree. It wasn't just an outburst, it was a statement that the narrative had changed. No, Clara, we can fix this, he insisted, but his words were empty. I was no longer the woman who could be persuaded by occasional promises of change. Instead, the Clara who emerged was a woman determined to start a new chapter of her life, a chapter that would not include her ex-husband. I knew the next step was to file for divorce. A gesture that would not only end our marriage but would free the woman who had been suffocated by years of lies and betrayals. The messages between him and Martha were a central point of my strategy, and I was ready to use them as weapons. In the following days, I consulted a lawyer I respected. His office was formal. White walls and a long, clean desk reflected the seriousness of what was to come. After discussing the evidence, a wave of liberation washed over me. The divorce was no longer a possibility in the shadows, but a certainty that untied me from the past. You have a strong case, my lawyer said, as he examined the messages. Each word resonated within me like an echo of power. The idea of having control over my destiny filled me with courage. The following weeks were filled with meetings, planning, and the meticulous collection of evidence.
I revisited every message, every proof of the betrayal.
The tears I once shed turned into focus, and fear dissipated, giving way to a relentless determination. Then, one day, Richard decided to contact me again. His message sounded desperate. We need to talk. Reading his words, a soft laugh escaped my lips. He still didn't understand that the game had changed, that I was no longer the vulnerable Clara. I decided that not responding was the best choice. This refusal only widened the distance between us, and the more he tried to reach me, the more I affirmed my decision. Finally, the morning of the hearing arrived. I was nervous, but a sense of security enveloped me. Every document in my folder was a representation of my struggle, a symbol of the victory I was about to achieve. Upon arriving at the courthouse, I felt the energy around me. Richard was there, and his look reflected concern. He couldn't hide his fear. He was no longer in a dominant role. He was just a shadow of the man he used to be. The hearing began with questions that tried to discredit my integrity, but with each answer, I stood firm. An immense courage grew within me. I knew I was in control of the situation. The judge, attentive, took notes. Everything I said had weight and purpose. When the judge finally delivered his decision, my heart raced. The verdict was in my favor. My effort, my sleepless nights, had materialized into a victory, a breath of freedom. The smile that formed on my lips was the expression of redemption.
Richard's look in my direction said it all.
He was no longer the man who held power over me. Now, he was a prisoner of his own choices. The room felt like a stage, where each actor played their part. I was the protagonist who had risen from the ashes, and the future was before me, waiting to be written. With a new focus, I was ready to rewrite my story. The divorce had become not just an ending, but a glorious beginning. What awaited me would be a journey I would forge with every step, and freedom was finally palpable. The fight wouldn't end here, but what was once pain was now transforming into strength. It was time for the Clara who had always been inside me to manifest with all her power. I left the courthouse feeling as if the air was lighter, as if an invisible pressure had been lifted. The victory in the divorce was more than an ending. It was a liberation and an opportunity for renewal. Seized by a new determination, I realized I was ready to design my future without the shadows of a toxic relationship. In the days that followed, I dove into a project I had been dreaming of for a long time, opening my own law firm. A space where I could help women who, like me, needed support to get back on their feet. Every step taken in this direction was an affirmation that I was truly changing. I sat in a coffee shop filled with natural light, planning and sketching ideas for what my new space would be. The aroma of fresh coffee inspired me to move forward, drawing strength from the new life I was building. Every client I would welcome in my future office would give me the opportunity to transform not only their lives, but my own as well. A month later, I organized a small celebration with friends and family. I made a toast, full of hope and gratitude, celebrating not only the victory in court but the liberation from a life that had suffocated me. In that space, I was not alone. There was a solid support system around me, and with it, my strength became an even stronger foundation. As my law firm project took shape, the first cases began to arrive. Each of the women who walked through my door reminded me of who I was, and what I had overcome. With each case, my confidence grew. I was empowering others to recognize their strengths and, in turn, finding my own. Although the path seemed bright, life always has a way of holding surprises. Months later, while handling a client's emotional abuse case, I received a message from Richard. It was direct. "We need to talk." An initial impulse made me want to ignore him, but a subtle curiosity began to creep into my mind. What did he want now? After pondering, I decided that this meeting could be important, not just for him, but for me as well. If I had truly changed, I needed to prove it to myself. I arranged to meet him in a park, a calm environment where the pressure of our old dynamic could be softened. Richard's restless look upon seeing me confirmed that he was no longer the dominant figure in my life. The conversation started tensely, but I maintained my composure. "Clara, I heard you opened your own firm." "I'm happy for you," Richard said, vulnerability in his eyes. "Thank you, Richard. It's an important part of my life now," I replied, staying focused. He continued, trying to express regret, explaining that he was seeking help. "I recognize that I was wrong. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know," he murmured. I listened to his words, not with compassion, but as if I were hearing a distant echo of a past that no longer defined me. The pain he caused wouldn't disappear, but I was far from being a victim now. "Richard, your transformation is no longer my burden. I am not the woman you manipulated. I am here to focus on my future," I stated, each word imbued with a new clarity. He nodded, without arguing. The meeting wasn't about reconciling the past, but about accepting that we had both taken different paths. I felt a wave of relief as I realized that, although there were still remnants of old memories, they were now just memories and not open wounds. After we said our goodbyes, I left the meeting with a renewed sense of freedom. The weight I had been carrying had dissipated, and I was finally ready to move on, without looking back. My journey was just beginning, full of new possibilities and dreams to be realized. The future, adorned with the promise of true authenticity, was now mine to create. I left the park with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The sun shone brighter, and the fresh wind seemed to carry away any remnant of the past that had once weighed me down. The reunion with Richard was a reminder of how much I had progressed, as a person who had finally managed to take the reins of her own life. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work. Opening my own firm wasn't just a professional matter, I was reinventing myself. With each new client I received, I not only helped solve their problems but also rediscovered parts of my own strength, parts that had been dormant for a long time. Deep conversations about their experiences intertwined with my own, and the empathy we shared became a bridge to healing. One morning, while reviewing a case in my office, I received a phone call that broke my focus. It was an old college classmate, Claudia.
Clara, can you believe what is happening? The law school is networking event?
It's happening next month. You should come. Her voice was overflowing with enthusiasm, and I, hesitant, couldn't quite grasp what this meant for me. For a moment, the idea of returning to that environment made me anxious. It had been a long time since I had attended these events, especially after what I had been through. But soon, determination took over. It was time to reintroduce myself to the world, without the weights that had once tormented me.
You rewrite, Claudia. I'll be there.
I exclaimed, a growing excitement building inside me. I thought, why not? This was another step toward my new life. When the day of the event arrived, I entered the imposing, decorated, and brightly lit hall. Anticipation floated in the air, lawyers circulated, exchanging cards and experiences. Some of the faces were familiar, but many were new. As I walked around, my initial shyness dissipated, replaced by a confidence that grew with each conversation. The past had shaped who I was, but now I was stronger and full of purpose. I found myself in enriching conversations, sharing stories about my firm and the cases I was handling. The look of admiration in others' eyes spurred me on even more. A woman approached and, after introducing herself, asked a question that left me in a state of reflection. "Clara, have you always had this strength? What motivated you to open your own firm?" Hearing those words, I realized that I had always had a spark of determination. It just needed to be rekindled. I went through difficult times that taught me the value of resilience. "I want to help other women find their strength," I replied, feeling each sentence carry the weight of my truth. This was the Clara who had never been revealed. At the end of the event, I returned home with renewed energy and the conviction that I was on the right path. Every step, every small achievement, helped to draw a new trajectory. I felt I had become bigger than the weight of my past and was ready to brave the future. Life was truly full of possibilities, and I was finally at the helm, navigating seas I never thought I'd be able to explore.
The horizon ahead promised authenticity and fulfillment.
Each day was a new opportunity to blossom, and for the first time in a long time, I cherished the hope of a tomorrow that mirrored everything I wished to be.